All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to another Sunday morning Bible study, Trimmed and Burning Bible study, where we are in 2 Samuel. Remember, for those of us who have missed or have been a while, we are in the Bible, telling God's word as one story through one family. We're connecting the 66 books to be one long movie story, basically, so you can make sense of it. Because we often think that these are just a bunch of different books, and they are different books from different time periods, but they literally connect and tell one storyline. So from Genesis right through Esther, those first books there, 17 books, 5 by Moses, 12 here, they will tell the history of creation all the way up to the intertestamental period before the Greeks come on, when the Persians are still in charge. So that's what we're going through right now. We're in the 10th book. We're in 2 Samuel, and David is now king. We're just going to go ahead and jump right in. So we're going to pick back up a couple chapters where we left off. We're going to be in 2 Samuel 11 today. But we'll just kind of recap again quickly just to remember, get our minds going of what's going on in the story, because it's really important. We even looked at, remember last week, I'll kind of go over Nahash and how he actually showed up in 1 Samuel 11. If you didn't read 1 Samuel, you'd have no idea how crazy it was that David and Nahash had a friendship. So it's really amazing to see how it all ties together. So 2 Samuel 7, this is the Davidic covenant, one of the most popular chapters in the Bible. David wanted to build a house for God. He had his house built, this amazing house of cedar, and he realized, wait a minute, God's in a tent. I should make him a house. God says, I don't need a house, David. I would have asked for a house by now 400 years ago with Moses if I really wanted one. I don't need one, but I'm going to build you a house. So God flips it around on him. And at first you can say, well, how's he going to build him a house? He already has a house. Well, it's a dynastic house, a dynasty through his family. And it's really Jesus Christ pointing to the Messiah, that one day his bloodline will carry out the messianic line. But he's going to bless his line forever, and forever one of his sons will be on the throne. And of course, David prays a prayer of gratitude, thanks the Lord, reminds him of his promises, and says, please allow this to be done. We see there David praying God's promises back to him, which is a good reminder to us to pray God's prayers out loud, or his promises out loud, to remind us that God can do what we're asking for. It's a good reminder for ourselves. God already knows what he can do. Sometimes we forget God's power when we pray. David shows us right here how to do that. Then in 2 Samuel 8, after now David's king, now he got this dynasty that's going to be coming, the Lord is going to now bless him and expand the kingdom under David. He starts conquering Aram and Syria. That's to the north. Then the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Edomites, so the east and the south. And then he takes out the Philistines to the west. So it's showing David is conquering in all directions. And not only conquering, but expanding the kingdom. The Lord's blessing him. And with that, we also learn about his administration to show that a good, strong king has a good set of leaders that he has trained to be administrators. And it gives a list of all of them there. And that's where David starts to expand the kingdom. Then in chapter 9, we got to see the gospel message in the Old Testament again. We're seeing that over and over and over. God has embedded the code of the gospel all in through these stories. Here's Mephibosheth, Jonathan's grandson, or Jonathan's son, right? Saul's grandson. And he is crippled, and David went out and sought him out, went and looked for him, and he was crippled from the fall, just like humanity. We're crippled from our fall, right? And David goes out and seeks him. Even though he's not worthy, calls him by name and brings him and says, you can eat at my table forever. Exactly what Jesus is going to do to us. We are not worthy, and I love what Mephibosheth says. Why would you do that to a dead dog such as I? Why do you care about me, God? But again, it's showing how God was showing through David here how God will love us, how Christ will love us, and did this for us. So that was the story of Mephibosheth, how David got him. And then last week, this is where we were last week, 2 Samuel chapter 10. Remember Hanun. He was the king, the new king. His dad had died, Nahash, he had died. And David is going to send an envoy, which is pretty common. When a king dies, you send some ambassadors to wish him well, maybe bring some gifts. That's exactly what David does, because it says he was friends and he wants to keep this good relationship with Nahash. Now, the weird thing was, last week I went into this. If you go back to 1 Samuel 11, all you have to do is read the first couple verses of 1 Samuel 11, and Nahash is the same guy that was going to make all of Israel gouge their right eyes out. And he hated King Saul and Israel. So I asked, how could David consider Nahash a friend if he's in history books as wanting to gouge out the right eyes of Israel to humiliate them? Well, we think that when he was running from Saul, when Saul became David's enemy, David and Saul were enemies and David was fleeing, perhaps he ran into Nahash and they made a friendship, right? Because the enemy of your enemy is your friend. So that's probably Nahash how he thought of David, the enemy of his enemy. So he sends an envoy up, and Hanun gets bad advice. His advisors say, David's not really here to help you. He's here to spy on you. So what did Hanun do? He was a foolish thing. He cuts off their clothes at their hip, shaves off half their beard, and humiliates them. And that was actually even against the law. because they're supposed to keep their beards in a certain amount of shape. So Hanun did this and basically started a war when it was unnecessary. So I even talked about last week the difference between chapter 9 and chapter 10. Chapter 9, David shows kindness to Mephibosheth. He didn't deserve it. He shows up in Lodabar. He goes to Mephibosheth and offers him kindness. Mephibosheth accepts it, and he'll be living with the king forever. That's like Christ with us, the believers. When Christ shows us his kindness and love, he shows it to everybody. Some of us accept it, and we're so thankful. We're like Mephibosheth. We're dead dogs. We don't deserve this, and God, appreciates it, takes us in anyway. Then there's the people who don't believe in God. Jesus comes and offers his love and forgiveness, and people say, I don't need you. Get out of here. I don't want you anyway. It's very much like Hanun did, and what does it end up in? War and death, right? And the Lord will go to war and essentially killed for the second time all the people that opposed him, very similar to Hanun here. So you can even see the message of the gospel here, accept or reject it. It's in 2 Samuel 9 and 10. Then we have God who leads Joab and Abishai to victory. Joab and Abishai, of course, are his nephews. They're the brother of Asahel who was murdered. They're very strong warriors, some of David's best guys. They go and fight. Remember, they're trapped on both sides. Some of them are up at the city, and then they hired those mercenaries, the professional fighters, to be behind them. But God is with them because all these professional fighters flee. And I said it would be like if we had to go in a hand-to-hand combat with a bunch of UFC fighters, and when we went up to fight them, the UFC fighters ran from us. It wouldn't really make sense. These are trained fighters, trained warriors, and they ran. You can just see God. It's a divine thing. God causing panic in their hearts and getting them to retreat without any bloodshed. So I think it's God acting there again. And then you see, of course, they retreated, and then they came back. King Hadadezer went back and got warriors from across the river and said, we're going to go attack again. And I said, you see that in the Bible a lot. When Israel defeats their enemies, they'll retreat and they'll come back. And it's just like that with our sin. So if you conquer a sin and say, wow, I've really conquered this temptation, don't forget it will regroup and come back. That seems to be what the Bible points out with war here, and it also can reflect in a spiritual sense. And that's what happened last week, and that was chapter 10. Now we're going to jump into 2 Samuel chapter 11. So if you got your Bibles, you can open up there, 2 Samuel chapter 11, and we'll go verse by verse and go ahead and break this all down. 2 Samuel chapter 11, verse number 1. In the spring of the year, the time when kings go out to battle, David sent Joab and his servants with him, and all Israel. And they ravaged the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained at Jerusalem. It happened late one afternoon when David arose from his couch and was walking on the roof of the king's house, that he saw from the roof a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful. And David sent and inquired about the woman. And one said, is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? So David sent messengers and took her, and she came to him, and he lay with her. Now she had been purifying herself from her uncleanness. Then she returned to her house, and the woman conceived, and she sent and told David, I am pregnant. So David sent word to Joab, send me Uriah the Hittite. And Joab sent Uriah to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked how Joab was doing, and how the people were doing, and how the war was going. Then David said to Uriah, go down to your house and wash your feet. And Uriah went out of the king's house, and there followed him a present from the king. But Uriah slept at the door of the king's house with all the servants of his lord, and did not go down to his house. When they told David, Uriah did not go down to his house. David said to Uriah, have you not come from a journey? Why did you not go down to your house? Uriah said to David, the ark and Israel and Judah dwell in booths, and my lord Joab and the servants of my lord are camping in the open field. Shall I then go to my house to eat and to drink and to lie with my wife? As you live and as your soul lives, I will not do this thing. Then David said to Uriah, remain here today also, and tomorrow I will send you back. So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. And David invited him, and he ate in his presence and drank, so that he made him drunk. And in the evening he went out to lie on his couch with the servants of his lord, but he did not go down to his house. In the morning David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah. In the letter he wrote, set Uriah in the forefront of the hardest fighting, and then draw back from him, that he may be struck down and die. And as Joab was besieging the city, he assigned Uriah to the place where he knew there were valiant men. And the men of the city came out and fought with Joab, and some of the servants of David among the people fell. Uriah the Hittite also died. Then Joab sent and told David all the news about the fighting. And he instructed the messenger, when you have finished telling all the news about the fighting to the king, Then if the king's anger rises, and if he says to you, why did you go so near to the city to fight? Did you not know that they would shoot from the wall? Who killed Abimelech, the son of Jerubasheth? Did not a woman cast an upper millstone on him from the wall, so that he died at Thebez? Why did you go so near the wall? Then you shall say, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also. So the messenger went and came and told David all that Joab had sent him to tell. The messenger said to David, the men gained an advantage over us and came out against us in the field, but we drove them back to the entrance of the gate. Then the archers shot at your servants from the wall. Some of the king's servants are dead, and your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also. David said to the messenger, thus shall you say to Joab, do not let this matter displease you, for the sword devours now one and now another. Strengthen your attack against the city and overthrow it, and encourage him. When the wife of Uriah heard that Uriah, her husband, was dead, she lamented over her husband. And when the mourning was over, David sent and brought her to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. But the thing that David had done displeased the Lord. All right, 2 Samuel chapter 11, the worst chapter in David's life. If you actually only knew David by this story, you'd probably hate the guy. You probably would not like David if you read this. But we think of David as a pretty good king and a man after God's own heart. But this chapter reminds us that even the best can slip into some ugly sin if things aren't in check. So let's look at the first 5 verses. Verse number 1. In the spring of the year, the time when kings go out to battle, David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, and they ravaged the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah. But David remained at Jerusalem. So this Ammonite battle, these are the ones they were battling in 2 Samuel chapter 10. This is who they're going to go to war with. But you see a key thing in the beginning. In the spring of the year, the time when kings go out to battle. What you have to understand is in the Near East, things were very seasonal. So just like here, and you even know about, in the world wars, these things happen with Russia, the tough winters. You don't really want to fight through snowstorms or really cold. They don't really have snowstorms much there, but heavy rains, cold winds, it made traveling terrible, fighting in these, the military, really, really difficult. So the thing back then was that the kings would go out, and the kings were supposed to lead their armies, and they would go out into the battle in the spring. So this, you can actually start to see, it's starting out right out the gate. We're going to learn about a misstep from David and his tragic downfall. And it shows us that the sign or sin usually starts out not with an outright sinful act at first, but with a neglect of duty sometimes, or neglect of responsibility. So you see, David, according to these words here, should be out leading a battle. That's his responsibility as a king. He should be going out and leading this battle against the Ammonites here. So that's the problem. And he sends them out. Instead, he sends out Joab. You can see he sent Joab, which is his military commander. You wouldn't have thought anything of it until you realize, this is a time when the kings go out, and Joab's not a king, right? But it says they go out, they were victorious in battle. They take Rabbah, which Rabbah is the capital of the Ammonites. So now, not only did they defeat them, they're now taking their city, their capital, right? And the Israelites, you can see, were victorious in battle. So you think, well, it's going to be great. It starts out really good. They go out into battle and they win and they defeat everything. But what interesting thing is, what you're going to see is why the nation of Israel is prospering. Like, yeah, we just fought this battle. It's overshadowed by David's sin. And again, it seems so minor that he stayed home. And in his mind, he probably thought, it's not a big deal. We're defeating the Ammonites. Joab, I've said him before, he's a strong guy. He can go out and fight this. And maybe in his mind, he wasn't wrong. Joab could have done this. But again, it was this reason is why he's going to slip into maybe what we call his greatest downfall ever. And you could say here, you can just, by looking at this here, and what we're going to get into, that the best way to avoid falling into temptation is just to be where God tells you to be. When you're in places that God tells you not to be, like God says, hey, go out there and fight these wars with your people, and you're not doing that, you're going to open yourself up to some sinful opportunities. All right, verses number 2 and 3. It happened late one afternoon when David arose from his couch and was walking on the roof of the king's house that he saw from the roof of a woman bathing. And the woman was very beautiful. And David sent and inquired about the woman, and once said, is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? So when it says David arose from his couch, was walking on the roof, basically the rooftop of the palace, right? This would have given a really good view of the city. You guys have probably gone up before to really tall buildings and looked over. You go to the Empire State Building or something, and you look out over the city. Wow, this is really, really cool. Or you climb up a mountain, hike up a mountain, you look out. You always get a really, really good view. So Bathsheba was not in public view. When we say sees a woman bathing, we don't understand this because we don't do it like today. Be like, why is he looking in her house, right? Well, it was a little bit different. She would have maybe been in an outdoor area bathing, but it wouldn't have been in public sight. So, it'd be like somebody like, if you had to get in a swimming pool or something like that, and you're bathing in a swimming pool, and you had a fence around your house, you'd feel pretty safe, like, all right, cool, I'm in the privacy of my own home. But not so private if there's a guy up there on the roof, right? So David, it's not that Bathsheba's being indecent by any means. She's probably doing what she's supposed to do. But David has a good view, and his wandering gaze leads to his downfall. And by the way, you can see the Bible. There's another pattern in the Bible. Sin will often start with the eyes, you'll notice. Think about Genesis. Think about Eve. What did she do the fruit first before she did it? She saw. She saw the fruit. It was pleasing to the eyes, it says, before she ate it. So that was the fruit was pleasing before the eyes. And if you go to Joshua 7, this is also Achan. You remember him? Achan or Achan, whatever you call him. He stole the stuff when he wasn't supposed to, and they got defeated by Ai. That was because he saw the forbidden treasures, and he saw it and acted upon it. Now, the problem, remember, seeing something isn't a sin, because people always say, is this a sin, is this a sin? Seeing something isn't a sin, but dwelling on it. If David looked down and saw Bathsheba, he should have seen and said, hey, I shouldn't be doing this, and should have, like, wow, I shouldn't be out here right now. I'm going to go back in. But instead, he stops and continues to look. When you continue to look, now you're going to start to get yourself into sin. Matthew 5:28, what does it say? Everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So according to Jesus, David is actually committing a sin right here just by standing and watching, which is true. But he sees, he sticks around and watches, and the longer he looks, the desire gets stirred up in his heart. And it's exactly what James says. James 1:14-15 says, but each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desire, when it is conceived, gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. And again, it's really interesting how you can see these New Testament truths that we've seen about the New Testament played out here in the Old Testament. David didn't have the book of James, but it was still the same. So that thing they say about when he's asking about this woman, who is this woman, right? And this is kind of not that surprising because we know that David has Ahinoam, he's got Abigail, he had Michal, he has all these wives and these concubines, and that was a thing back then. Not a good thing, right? Not a good thing for a godly king, but all the other kings around were doing this, and David just kind of doing this. It was a way to have power and all that stuff. So it's like, oh, here we go again. David's looking after a woman, and he actually checks into her, and they say, oh, that's the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite. So for a couple reasons, this should have stopped David right away and said, oh, yeah, I shouldn't pursue this anymore. Number one, she was the daughter of Eliam. If you go, you don't have to go to this now, but 2 Samuel 23, we'll eventually get to 2 Samuel 23. That's the chapter we hear about all of David's mighty men. This is one of his mighty men. So this is the daughter of one of his mighty men, Eliam here. So he should have said, oh, that's, a loyal warrior. That's his daughter. That would be, I don't know if I should do that. But even worse, the worst of it all, she was the wife. He could have just stopped there. She's the wife of a man. Could have said that, right? And that was enough to be like, okay, I shouldn't be doing this. Not only that, even to make it worse, she's the wife of Uriah the Hittite. And a couple verses after, in 2 Samuel 23, I think verse 39 it is, Uriah the Hittite also shows up as one of David's mighty men. So this is Uriah the Hittite's not just some guy. He's listed later in this book as one of David's 37 mighty men. Uriah is listed even after his death here. So it's really sad to see he took one of his elite warriors' wives. He knew this. Like, hey, she's married. Not only that, she's the daughter of one of your warriors here, and she's married to that warrior over here. These are your mighty men that have been fighting your battles. You should probably, stick away. They didn't say that because he's the king, but these are reasons he should have stopped. Now, the Bible, we have a lot of examples because people say, well, this is a really bad example of giving into lust. Well, we have an example in Genesis of how to handle this stuff. Joseph, remember Joseph and Potiphar's wife? This is why he ended up in jail. Potiphar's wife accused him of rape, right? And that was even worse. So here David's jumping into sin and getting into sin, giving into his lust. Joseph wasn't looking for lust, right? Potiphar's wife was coming on to him, and Joseph resists. You can see two different examples here in the Bible. You could be a Joseph or a David. David gives into a sin and actually pursues the sin. Joseph's not even pursuing. He's resisting temptation. So you can see, David runs toward it. Joseph fled from it, right? Verses 4 and 5, we'll finish up this little section here. So David sent messengers and took her, and she came to him, and he lay with her. Now she had been purifying herself from her uncleanness. Then she returned to her house, and the woman conceived, and she sent and told David, I am pregnant. So David now escalates this, right? He's looking at the woman. That was already a sin for him, looking at her naked while she's bathing. That was already a problem. Finds out she's married. He should be turning the other way. But instead, he goes even deeper. You'll see David just keeps going harder and harder and harder into his sin. He sends messengers and takes her, which is a deliberate act of power. As the king, you could do that. Hey, bring me her. Hey, bring me him. And as the king, you had that power. So he's now abusing his power, essentially, to take somebody's wife and have her summoned to him, right? And this looks a lot like the pagan kings. In the world, they wouldn't have, his servants might not even been that surprised. I mean, probably surprised, like, well, this is not really godly, and you follow the one true God. But all the other kings do this, and I know they take women, and they do this to women, and they do this to men. But remember, those are Gentile nations that are sinful, not following God's ways. They're not the ways to follow. And that's, again, that's the problem. If you follow the ungodly people, you can start slipping into their ways. And this is what David is essentially doing here. Look at that one next section here. It says, now she had been purifying herself from uncleanness. So you can imagine, so back then, Leviticus 15, 19 to 24, I don't read it. You can read it in detail. I don't need to read it in detail. But it was how when a woman was ceremonially unclean during her menstrual cycle, essentially what it was, she had to pure herself afterward, right? And that there was actually a rule. Leviticus 15, 19 to 24, like I said, I won't read them, but you can read. She's going through a legal process after her menstrual cycle of how to purify herself. Now, this is a really weird thing. Like, all right, well, we could have just done without that. We could have just learned that she was doing a bath. Like, why do we need these details? Well, every detail is in the Bible for a reason. Does anybody have a guess why this might be in the Bible? Why it mentions this little detail here? Does anybody have any guess? Beard.
Because it adds to David's sin, because he's not supposed to, a woman is not supposed to lie with a man during that time.
Correct. So, yeah, so that's against the law. So he shouldn't even be laying with her, going through this whole purifying cycle. I mean, it's already a sin that she's married. Now it's a sin here. And then to make it even worse on top of this, that means we know, because what do we learn a little bit here? We learned that she is pregnant at the end of verse 5. I am pregnant. So what we know then is this can't be Uriah's. This couldn't be Uriah's anyway. It couldn't be a mishap of this David's or Uriah's because she was just going through her menstrual cycle. So she couldn't have been pregnant up until this point. It's solidifying that this is David. This is all David because he's the next man to lie with her, it says, right? So this confirms that before this encounter, she had no child, so it makes it even worse. But yeah, he shouldn't even, we can just keep listing reasons why David is in the wrong. It's just getting worse and worse the more we look at it. But the irony is that Bathsheba here is trying to follow the law. She's actually trying to listen to God. That bath wasn't just some bath to clean up. She was following God's law in Leviticus. So she's out here trying to obey God, and here's David out here sinning against God simultaneously, which is really, really interesting here. Now, we'll go to verses 6 through 13. Look at 6 through 9 here first. So David sent word to Joab, send me Uriah the Hittite. And Joab sent Uriah to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked how Joab was doing and how the people were doing and how the war was going. Then David said to Uriah, go down to your house and wash your feet. And Uriah went out of the king's house, and there followed him a present from the king. But Uriah slept at the door of the king's house with all the servants of the Lord and did not go down to his house. So David now uses kingly authority to summon. He just summoned Bathsheba. Then he does what he did, finds out, she's going to be pregnant. Now he's summoning Uriah, right, using his kingly authority to do this. And Uriah was probably surprised because it was not common to be called off the battlefield unless there was some big thing going on. So I'm sure he was very surprised. And you see Uriah comes back, and David makes it look like he actually cares about him, right? He says, when Uriah came to him, David asked, hey, how's Joab? Hey, how's the war going, Uriah? Making small talk with him. How's everything going out there? Just wanted to check in on everything. It's like, David, you didn't just want to check in on everything. You summoned him from the battlefield for a reason. But you can see David's kind of being deceptive here. He's pretending that he cares about things, and he's just bringing Uriah in as a news anchor to give me an update on what's going on out there, right? And he's one of his mighty warriors, so, and he's going to listen. He's one of his better fighters, so maybe he's like, all right, well, David wants to talk to me about all these things. So it's basically diplomacy. Well, disguised as deception, disguised as diplomacy. David's actions are very self-serving. He's calling Uriah out, calling him for his own reasons. Uriah is listening because he's an obedient warrior of David. The reason, obviously, that he brings him back is that David hopes that Uriah would sleep with Bathsheba, because that would make this whole child's birth seem natural. Like, oh, it was the father. Uriah came back from the battlefield after David called him. He ended up sleeping with Bathsheba, and that's just kind of how it happened. So you can see David here is trying to cover up his sin. He's covering up his sin, and it's going to continue on. He's trying these different ways. If he can get Uriah to sleep with her, this will all be over. He can forget about what he did. He can move on. This won't be a problem anymore. And what's really interesting is he says, go down to your house and wash your feet. That's a euphemism. Wash your feet would have been a euphemism back then for go sleep with your wife. He would have understood exactly what that meant. And you can see he even gives a present. And we think it's possibly maybe food or probably maybe even wine. Something to encourage relaxation. Here, Take this bottle of wine, go home with your wife, enjoy the night off the battlefield. You deserve it, Uriah. He's basically giving everything he needed for Uriah to slip up into this issue. Now, in wartime, you have to understand, in wartime, soldiers abstained from marital relations to stay fervent on the battlefield. And this would have been common for him to know this. Like, this is not even a normal thing, David. You shouldn't be telling me this. Nobody else is doing this, right? So he confirms that, like he needs him to go down there, but Uriah shouldn't be doing it. Uriah shows discipline and loyalty here, because what does it say? David goes, but Uriah slept at the door of the king's house with all the servants of his Lord and did not go down to his house. So Uriah wants to be obedient and says, no, he might even thought, maybe David's testing me. Maybe he's seeing what kind of warrior I am. I'm going to show him I'm a strong warrior. I'm not even going to sleep with my wife. Nobody else is, doing that. So I'm going to stay right here with all of the other warriors. Verse 10 through 13. When they told David Uriah did not go down to his house, David said to Uriah, have you not come from a journey? Why did you not go down to your house? So I love that right there, verse 10. David's like, hey, you deserve this. Why aren't you taking a rest, Uriah? You've had a long journey off the battlefield. What are you doing? You should have went right home to your wife. It's the least thing you deserve. But Uriah said to David in verse 11, the ark and Israel and Judah dwell in booths, and my lord Joab and the servants of my lord are camping in the open field. Shall I then go to my house to eat and to drink and to lie with my wife? As you live and as your soul lives, I will not do this thing. So here again, you have David being such an ungodly king. Remember, David's always so godly in a lot of the previous chapters. He had some slips and falls. But now David is just a straight up sinner, basically an antagonist to anybody who wants to follow the Lord. He's having to do all these things. And you see Uriah is such a godly leader, he's a godly figure. He's saying, I'm not going to go sleep with my wife. He sounds like David again. Here's the ark. The ark, that's not in a house, and these guys are sleeping. If you guys don't have a house, I'm not having a house. I'm not sleeping in a comfortable bed with my wife if nobody else is doing it, especially if God's ark of the covenant. So he mentions the ark of the covenant here, showing that he's really careful and he cares about the Lord and honoring the Lord here. So it's showing a very honorable and godly thing. Uriah is actually thinking in the right mind space, right? Then we say, let's see, verse number 12. Then David said to Uriah, remain here today also, and tomorrow I will send you back. So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. So it's interesting. Why would David have him say, like, all right, well, if you're not going to do that, just stay here for the next 2 days. Just stay here. Why would he do that when there's a battle raging? His plan failed. Well, that's exactly what happened. His plan failed. It's like, well, he's not going to sleep with his wife. I need to buy some time. So I think here, David having him linger around is just having him here and David the whole time stroking his beard, like, how can I get rid of this guy? How am I going to make him sleep with his wife? How am I going to cover all this up so people don't think this is my kid? I need to get out of this sin. And he's probably probably has a little bit of anxiety over this. Verse 13, and David invited him, and he ate in his presence and drank, so that he made him drunk. And in the evening he went out to lie on his couch with the servants of his Lord, but he did not go down to his house. So what's really crazy is, so now David, so he tried to get him to sleep with his wife. He wouldn't do it. He wouldn't sleep there tonight. He gave him presents too. He wouldn't do it. So now his next thing, he sat around, well, I'll just get him drunk. I'll get him drunk and he'll do it. He'll be stupid enough because he'll drink so much, won't be in his right mind, and I'll get him to go down with his wife and sleep with her then. So, but even in his drunken state, even if he gets him drunk, it says, did not go down to his own house. So even getting him all wind up with all this stuff, Uriah still knows, nope, this isn't godly. I'm not doing it. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to stay here with everybody else. So David even tries that. And again, this is really interesting because Uriah is a Hittite. So Uriah the Hittite means he's not even an Israelite. This is the most maybe mind-blowing part of Uriah here. He's a Hittite, so he's not an Israelite. So you have Uriah who's just basically, he moved in, he's following all God's ways. He probably got circumcised, went through everything, and he's basically Jewish by converting. He'd been converting, and he's like, I'm going to fight with Israel now. I believe in the one true God, Yahweh. So it's a sign that Gentiles were saved. Uriah would have been a Gentile. Shows that you can be saved by God. But now you have this former Gentile who's now believing in Yahweh, and he's trying to give devotion to God and the Ark of the Covenant and these laws and all these things. And you have the King David here who's trying to lead him into sin. So it's really got ironic now. Godly King David is trying to get a Gentile to sin against Yahweh, and the Gentile won't do it because of God and his laws. It's so backwards, but it shows you again how somebody so godly if slipping into their sin, if you don't stop slipping, you don't just come clean and repent. David could have just came clean right in the beginning and repented, say, you know what, Lord, I did something wrong. Uriah, I got to admit what I did to you. It's so shameful of me. I'm sorry. He could have done this, but he keeps going further and further and further. And the further in his sin, now David's acting like a Gentile, and the Gentile's acting like a godly man. So I think Uriah being a Hittite and acting so godly is just another slap in the face to David. How could a Gentile follow God's laws? And you're doing this to him, David. You're doing all of these things. But David's now running out of options. He tried to get him to sleep with his wife. He wouldn't sleep with his wife. He tried to get him drunk. He got him drunk, but he still wouldn't sleep with his wife. So he's having a hard time here. Now look at verses 14 and 15. We'll do the end of the chapter here, 14 through 27. 14 and 15. In the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah. In the letter he wrote, set Uriah in the forefront of the hardest fighting, and then draw back from him, that he may be struck down and die. How awful is this, by the way? This shows you David now sees how loyal Uriah is. He already knew he was loyal. And he says, I'm going to deliver the message of his death right with Uriah. So Uriah carries his own death sentence in his hand. And he's so obedient, he's not going to look at it. He says he's in the morning, he sent to Joab a letter, and Uriah goes and delivers it to Joab, the general of the army. And in the letter it says, hey, I want you to attack, and when you attack, I want you to drop back and basically abandon Uriah on the battlefield. Basically go into some big war here, and when the war's going, everybody retreat. But don't tell Uriah. Let him out there fighting the whole army himself, and he'll die. So it's actually really sick what David did. And Uriah, being so obedient and such a faithful guy, doesn't even read it, doesn't even know he's going to die, and delivers it right here. Hey, have me killed. He has no idea that he's doing it. But it's amazing, again, to see how devoted Uriah is and how cold-hearted David's now got. David's now going to kill him, and he's going to make him deliver it. David's slowly getting more and more evil as the story goes on. Not only that, he doesn't even want him killed. It's even worse than that. He could have just said, hey, kill Uriah right now, stab him in the stomach. Could have had it done. No, not only that, he wants to get into even more sin. He wants to get even more deceptive. He says, I want to make this look like an accident. I want to assassinate him, and I want to do a cover-up. So now he's doing a government cover-up. Well, we accuse of the deep state doing all the time. Oh, they killed their opponents, and they're making all this stuff up. That literally happens today, and it happened back then. David was doing assassination and wanted to cover it up. It's pretty sick. So you can see David is now, his mind is super wicked. He's not only going to kill people, he's going to start being even more deceptive about it. Verses 16 and 17. And as Joab was besieging the city, he assigned Uriah to the place where he knew there were valiant men, the strong warriors. And the men of the city came out and fought with Joab. And some of the servants of David among the people fell. Uriah the Hittite also died. So Joab follows David's orders to have Uriah killed, but he doesn't do it fully, because he's supposed to go up there and retreat. And you see even Joab here is not as faithful as Uriah. Uriah probably would have followed it word for word. Joab does not. Joab has a different plan. He's trying to besiege the city, and he sends all of his troops up there. And you find out that some of the servants of David among the people fell. Some of them died. So now we're learning again. So David, who's supposed to be protecting his people, is now not only sacrificing Uriah, now all these other warriors are dying. Because Uriah has to die and Joab's taking him up, because Joab didn't follow things completely, Joab's slip up here ends up to other people dying. There were innocent Israelites that are dying. Why? All because David saw this woman bathing, slept with her, got her pregnant, and then all this chaos happened. So David's sin is affecting more and more and more people. And that's why I say, don't ever double down on your sin. Repent of it immediately, because your sin rarely only affects you and God. There's usually innocent bystanders around you where your sin will affect. And you're seeing with David, as he continues on, more and more people have become affected by his sin. He's supposed to be their shepherd, but David's starting to look like a wolf. I'm telling you, like if he were a church pastor right now, I'd say, get this guy out of here. This guy is no good. Think about that. I think a lot of us we'd sit down, me and the elders would sit down and say, yeah, this guy's no good, get him out of leadership. So it's crazy to see how far David has slipped into what he's doing. All right, verses 18 through 21 here. Then Joab sent and told David all the news about the fighting, and he instructed the messenger, when you have finished telling all the news about the fighting of the king, then if the king's anger rises, he says to you, why'd you go so near the city to fight? Did you not know they would shoot from the wall? Who killed Abimelech the son? And he goes on to ask about that. And then he says, then you shall say, after I ask all these questions, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also. So Joab anticipates David's not going to be happy that these other guys died, because Joab was supposed to kill Uriah, not the other guys. And he's already anticipating David's going to hate my war tactic, because he's a warrior. He's going to say, what were you doing? You're being an idiot by going so close. What he says there about Abimelech, that's Judges chapter 9. If you remember Gideon, Gideon that we know of, that was, feeble, whatever, did the fleece. He ends up having a son, Abimelech, means my father's king. because Gideon lost it at the end. If you go to the end of the story, he starts to lose it and gets gold and all this stuff. But Abimelech ended up killing all of his brothers, all of Gideon's other sons, except for one. I think it was Jotham. But Abimelech, the reason he dies is he gets so close to the wall. If you remember, this woman, when he gets so close, pushes off this millstone, falls on his head and kills him. And it's kind of reminiscent of Saul. Abimelech's laying there and says, he looks at his armor bearers like, kill me. I don't want to be known as being killed by a woman, which is ironic because it's in the Bible, it's him being killed by a woman. You can't escape it. But he literally, if you go to that story, he's like, kill me. I don't want to be killed by a woman. But this is what he's recalling. So Joab's saying, we have a historic event, knows that this is foolish to get too close to the walls because you'll get killed. David's going to ask me why I was being an idiot, why I did this when we know it doesn't work. Abimelech died this way. All I want you to do, if he gets mad, I want you to tell him that Uriah is dead, and he'll back off, right? So that's what we see that is said right there. So the servant is supposed to go deliver this message. So verse 22, so the messenger went and came and told David all that Joab had sent him to tell. The messenger said to David, the men gained an advantage over us and came out against us in the field, but we drove them back to the entrance of the gate. Then the archers shot at your servants from the wall. Some of the king's servants are dead, and your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also. Now does David, why were you doing this? The servant's smart. He goes, I'm just going to get it all out right now. I'm going to tell him that guys died. I'm going to tell him that Joab died. I don't want to answer any hard questions, right? And David doesn't bring anything up about Abimelech because he heard at the end, Uriah's dead. And it's probably at first he's like, I can imagine David's face, like, who died? What died? And he's like, Uriah's dead. Like, oh, okay, that's fine. It's kind of sick, but that's kind of how he acts here. And it says, verse 25, so David said to the messenger, thus shall you say to Joab, do not let this matter displease you, for the sword devours now one and now another. Strengthen your attack against the city and overthrow it. And encourage him, meaning encourage Joab. So this is pretty terrible response. So instead of being like, oh, all this death, I can't believe this awful thing happened. David basically goes, it happens, war, people are going to die. What are you going to do about it, Joab? Don't let any skin off your back. Don't worry about it. This happens. We're warriors. We've seen people die. Just remember to keep fighting, buddy. Keep fighting. Don't worry. Don't let it bother you. So it's pretty sick now. He's had a callous heart. He's not even caring that his own men are dying. And he's actually telling Joab, don't worry about it, man. Don't worry about this stuff. This happens all the time. So David, who was a man after God's own heart, back in 1 Samuel 13, when he's first called that, has now fallen so deeply into sin that he no longer even feels the weight of Uriah's death. I'm sure he felt guilty in the beginning, which is why he wanted him to sleep with him and cover all this stuff up. Now he's so far into sin, he doesn't even care. And did you know, if you keep sinning and sinning over and over and over with the same sin, you're going to be like this too. You're not even going to care until some believer, one of your Christian brothers and sisters says, hey, are you okay? You've been doing this? You're not going to realize it. And at first you might even be callous, what's the deal? What's the problem? Because you become so callous to sinning over and over and over and over and over again. And when you see no results, you think God's letting you get away with it, which he never is, by the way. The Bible says you're never getting away with anything. It might only be for this little bit of time. But you can convince yourself that it's not wrong. You can just keep on going, doing these sins. And it's not until somebody kind of snaps you out of it. The Lord will send somebody to snap you out of it there. But he's telling him again to strengthen his attack. So he's saying, hey, just keep on fighting. I know people are murdered, but just keep on going. We got to take over Rabbah. We got to take over the Ammonites anyway. Don't worry about it. Let's just keep on. We got a mission to take care of, Joab. And then the final two verses 26 and 27. When the wife of Uriah heard that Uriah, her husband, was dead, she lamented over her husband. And when the mourning was over, David sent and brought her to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. But the thing that David had done displeased the Lord. So Bathsheba, she's doing it naturally. She's mourning her husband, Uriah, who died. This is a natural response. I don't think Bathsheba knew that he got murdered. I don't know if she ever knows he got murdered. It might have come up in their conversation that David said, hey, I got to admit this to you. Or maybe he didn't. I don't know. But Bathsheba just finds out that her husband died, probably thinks, oh, poor Uriah, how awful it was that he died, and is really, really sad, lamenting over this, which is what you were supposed to do. It's supposed to last for several days. So it shows here Bathsheba is not complicit in this. These are real natural tears. She's not going along with David. These aren't crocodile tears. She's not faking it and to go along with it. She's really distraught. That was her husband that she loved, Uriah, right? So David, again, is effectively here, though, because it says, after she mourns, he takes her as his wife. Now, he had done this, remember, to Abigail. Remember when Abigail's husband died, Nabal? And God killed Nabal, remember? God kills Nabal in 1 Samuel, and David takes her as his wife, right? That was one thing. Now, this is a whole other thing. David has her husband murdered and takes her as a wife. Again, he doesn't need another wife. This is breaking the law. He already has more than one wife. He's already breaking the law as it is. He doesn't need any more women. But what he's trying to do here is he's trying to take this scandalous affair with Bathsheba and legitimize it. and marry her to now say, oh yeah, we just had this baby because we got married. You know, Uriah died in battle, and I kind of took her under my wing. Poor Bathsheba didn't have a husband, and we just kind of had this kid. So you can see here, David is trying to cover it up again. He keeps going further and further and further. Not only did he assassinate Uriah and cover that up, he's going to try to cover up this pregnancy by marrying her and saying this is some natural consequence of what had happened, because people are like, oh yeah, he married Abigail the same way. So it's just what happens. So you can see that he was trying to do this, but God cannot be deceived. So meanwhile, Joab knows about this. Bathsheba doesn't know about this. The warriors don't know what David's really doing. David thinks he's getting away with it, but the thing that David had done, it says, displeased the Lord. So again, you're not going to get away from God, and we're going to see all the effects of what happened here. But there's 3 big points I'll make here. Number 1, from this whole chapter, sin begins with small compromises. Remember, it all started with David not being where he should have been. That's how it all started. Had David gone out to battle, this story never happens. We never learn about Bathsheba. We never learn about any of this stuff. Sin is progressive, and it goes from temptation to action to consequence. And if you sin, repent immediately, because more and more consequence will come out of it. Number 2, the danger of misusing power. David uses authority to take what he wanted rather than to serve. If you're in a leadership position, it's to serve other people. It's not to get what you want. It's not to become a dictator and say, this is mine, bring me this, I want to take this. It's to be a leader and to be a shepherd. David here acts like a wolf. So when you're a leader over somebody, you have accountability, whether it's your children, your family, or some position here. Remember, you're there to serve, not to take, not to be a wolf like David was acting. He's supposed to be their shepherd here. And number 3, covering sin only makes it worse. Instead of confessing, David tried to manipulate the situation. And every time he manipulated it, it got worse and worse and worse. Remember, he tried to manipulate Uriah to go sleep with his wife. When he didn't, he got him drunk, which is a sin, right? And when that didn't work, he went and had him murdered. But that wasn't worse enough. He kept going and going and going. So covering up sin's only going to make it worse. Proverbs 28:13 says that. Whoever conceals his transgressions will not prosper, but he who confesses and forsakes them will obtain mercy. And one of the last things, remember that God sees all sin. So even if you're sinning today and you're caught in some sin, you don't think anybody knows it, God sees it. Just like you saw this, David, even though after the man of his own heart, 1 Samuel 13, David is going to see some excruciating punishment coming up for the rest of the book of 2 Samuel, essentially. Does anybody have any questions or comments based on anything there? Yeah, Dave. All right. It's going to be good.
In verse 11, chapter 11, verse 11, where Uriah is telling him how committed he is.
Yeah.
We obviously want to attack David here, and we do.
Mm-hmm.
But what's the difference? You go back to Adam and Eve, the pride and arrogance of their sin is the same thing with David.
Absolutely.
But what about us?
Right.
Doesn't it continue to us?
That's a great point.
It's just a good story of how we should not be. We put God, as David did, as Adam and Eve did, put God in a position where he had to allow Uriah to be killed because just a short time before that, he already made a covenant with David.
Yeah. Literally, in our recap, it was so close to this chapter. In the recap, we learned that God makes this promise to David, and God's not going to break his promise, by the way. And David is still going to be in heaven with us one day, and he's going to be ruling. He's going to be, pretty high up, right? And God will probably wipe this from our memories. Like, we probably won't be able to talk to him about Bathsheba. That's going to be gone for David's sake, right? But Dave's right here. Like, what is different from Adam and Eve? This is how it all started. And we can go over, like Gideon. I mentioned Gideon. We see most people don't even know. Gideon, like, oh, how good. He was this little feeble guy, and he got really strong. At the end, Gideon saying, bring me gold. I'm naming my kid. My son is king. I'm going to make a golden ephod, which is not for me. And everybody can slip into pride. Gideon's actually one of my favorite stories because he starts out really so feeble, and then kind of like how David even is. And it's a lesson to all of us. I like what Dave's saying. It's a lesson to all of us. If you think, oh, I would never do that, maybe you wouldn't do the Bathsheba thing. But if you think you're going to escape sin, and I would never slip into all these things. These are godly people in the Bible. You can't find one godly person other than Jesus Christ who doesn't sin. Solomon's going to be his son. He's going to be the wisest man who ever lives. They're going to slip into all kinds of sin that's going to wreak havoc on the kingdom. So don't ever let yourself think that you're so much higher than mightier than this person over here, because pride is the root of all sin. And it's a root, but there's different fruits of that root, right? So somebody's a drug addict over here, or somebody's abusive over here, or sleeping with all these women over here, and you say, I don't do that, don't do that. You still have the root problem. You have pride issues too. It comes out in other ways. So make sure you're looking at those fruit of that root and cutting them off when you can, not letting it grow. Because even David here, who is the godliest king, one of the godliest kings of all, a man after his own heart, he has a guy murdered. So it shows that you cannot escape pride and sin. You have to be checking yourself. This is why you should be reading the Bible and praying every day. The minute you don't, you'll slip into sin. You won't notice your sin anymore, and you'll continue living in it, and it'll get worse and worse and worse. So David makes a great point. We could beat up David all we want, but we're not much different than David in our own ways. Maybe we didn't do a Bathsheba thing, but there's other things that if you let your pride and stuff go and you don't check it, you don't check with God, you're going to get out of whack with things. That's a good point. Yeah, Matt.
In the thing that stuck out to me was Joab, and the fact that leadership was trying to tell him what to do, and he kind of had that battle of godly to ungodly, but yet he wanted to follow the leadership, so he tried to do it a godly way, but like his whole position in this is just...
That's what I love about Bible stories, because we always see it from, like, actually almost all of us, you see David and Bathsheba in the story. But you could do a whole lesson on just Uriah, or you could do a whole lesson on this just on Joab. Joab's is amazing, because Joab's a leader. And what is he supposed to do? Take orders from the king, right? And he's doing it. But you can see Joab's why doesn't Joab pull everybody back? He probably feels guilty. He loves Uriah. Uriah is one of the warriors. It's one of his buddies. Like, I can't just abandon him. We're going to still fight alongside him. I don't want him to die alone. So you can see, why did Joab make that difference? Probably because that was his buddy. Would you want to abandon your buddy because your boss told you to? And Joab, we could beat up Joab and say, Joab, you should have told David. You should have went right to the king and said, that's not godly. You should have sent a letter back. I'm not killing anybody. That's our troops. That's not a godly way to do it. But again, Joab's in a weird spot, because you have to listen to the king or you can be in trouble, right? But Joab's also not going to abandon Uriah. So there's a whole study you can do just on Joab alone in this, and that's a really great point. You got to feel for him. It's a really interesting situation. Joab has his own list of sins. He's a very violent man too. But go ahead.
It kind of just reminds me of, in the New Testament where, if your leadership is doing stuff or trying to encourage you to do stuff unbiblical, you are still responsible to follow God's word no matter what.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what he was trying to do here.
Yep.
Even though he knew it was...
Yeah, I wouldn't have wanted to be Joab in this situation. I'll tell you that right now. It wouldn't have been good. Had he rejected it, David could have had him killed. Like, let's be honest. If you don't follow the king, you can be killed. So he's in a weird spot here. So it's a really interesting analysis. And when you look at these stories, I love doing that. Take all these different angles as if, you're writing it from Joab's point of view, or you're Joab's lawyer, or you're Uriah. Like, it's really interesting to take these different views, because you'll find all these lessons that are hiding throughout this story. So thank you again, everybody. Go ahead, keep reading ahead. We'll continue on in the 2 Samuel series. Thanks again for joining us. Until next time, keep your lamps trimmed and burning.